Okay, so Grant decides that he's going to take Corinth, and so he sends elements of his army down the Tennessee River under one of his trusted subordinates, a man by the name of General William T. Sherman. And I'll probably talk about Sherman a little bit more today, but Sherman becomes Grant's closest advisor, closest friend, I guess you would say, even during the Civil War. Grant and Sherman make this absolutely phenomenal team during the Civil War. Sherman, I think I'm going to go ahead and talk about him now. He's a very interesting character. If you know anything about the Civil War, Sherman is very famous in the South for supposedly burning most of Georgia, which he did not do. Sherman was from Ohio, like all of the top Union brass, or most of them anyway. He, like Grant, had gone to West Point. He didn't know Grant at West Point. They went at a different time. Sherman actually didn't fight in Mexico, which was kind of unusual. It was just kind of a question of timing. Sherman's brother was a senator to the in the U.S. Senate, and John Sherman, I believe was his name. And so Sherman is very well connected. Sherman had also spent some time in Louisiana. Sherman, he actually was the commandant of a cadet school in Louisiana. Sherman liked Southerners. He was very, very comfortable in the South. He's not a man that owned slaves. He was from Ohio, but he didn't really care about slavery. Sherman was also, I wouldn't call him manic depressive, but he had a little bit of those attributes, and he was quite brilliant as well. And when the war begins, Sherman, like most other Union officers or U.S. Army officers who had had experience before the Civil War, if you had any kind of officer experience before the Civil War, you're going to rise pretty quickly within the Union Army, because the Union Army grows from something like 16,000 men to over 1 million men in just about an 18-month period. So if you have any kind of officer experience at all, you're going to go to the top pretty quickly. And in addition, Sherman's brother was a U.S. Senator, so he was very, very politically connected as well. Sherman fought actually at the first Bull Run, that battle that I talked about that happened very early in the war, where Union troops were routed. This was before McClellan arrived on the scene. But Sherman's career got sidetracked because he saw what it was going to take to defeat the South. Sherman was not one of those Union officers or Northerners who felt like the Civil War would end very, very quickly. And at the beginning of the war, it's almost a cliche, actually, to talk about that, how both sides thought that they could win this thing pretty quickly and pretty easily. But it happens to be true. It's a cliche that happens to be true. Maybe a lot of cliches are true. I'm not sure. Anyway, the point is that Sherman sees very clearly what it's going to take to defeat the South. It's going to take the mobilization of a huge army that has to capture an enormous amount of territory. And it kind of freaks him out. And he's going around and he's talking about this, and he's warning folks in the North what it's going to take to defeat the South. And he has kind of a quasi-nervous breakdown of sorts. And he's kind of sidelined for a bit. People think he's crazy. They think he's over-emotional, very, very excitable, when in fact he just had a clear picture of what it was going to take to defeat the South. And he wasn't shy about talking about it. And people were kind of mocking him about it. And so for a bit in the war, Sherman is sidelined. He becomes kind of a figure of ridicule. But he's assigned to Grant's army. And he still has a high officer rank. And so Grant sends his troops, the troops that had defeated or conquered Fort Henry, Fort Donelson, he sends them south down the Tennessee River because the Union Army has decided that Corinth, Mississippi, because it's such a significant railroad center, is the position that the Union has to capture next. And by doing so, it can really chop up the transportation system of the Lower South. So Sherman, after Donelson and Henry, he takes elements of Grant's army, and he stops at a place called Pittsburgh Landing. We call it Shiloh as well. It's on the Tennessee River. Pittsburgh Landing, Shiloh, exactly the same place. Okay, they're exactly the same place. Shiloh is actually a little church in this position, which is why it's called Shiloh. So basically, the reason that Sherman stops the march of Grant's troops a little bit east of Corinth is that he wants to spend some more, and Grant's going to make it down there eventually too. He had just sent Sherman on ahead. He wants to spend maybe a little bit more time training Grant's troops. Remember, Grant's troops are still very, very inexperienced. They're very green. But more importantly, what Sherman is waiting for is reinforcements by the Union General Buell, who has marched down from Bowling Green, Kentucky, through Nashville, and he is going to meet up with Grant's troops at Pittsburgh Landing or Shiloh. Again, they're the same place. Buell is going to meet up with Grant's forces at Pittsburgh Landing, and by meeting up and then joining them, create an army of 75,000 men. And this army of 75,000 men, once it's joined together, would then attack Corinth, Mississippi, would then attack this railroad center. And it would be quite a formidable force that would be almost impossible for the Confederates to defeat. So what happens is that the Union Army has grown overconfident. Sherman gets there first. He gets to Pittsburgh Landing first. Buell will not actually arrive at this position until late on the first day of the Battle of Shiloh. So he's not there yet. His men are marching down from Nashville at this time. So basically, it's Grant's troops are at Pittsburgh Landing, and they're very overconfident. They're very inexperienced. They don't spend any time digging defensive trenches. They would not make that mistake again. It just seems like a lark. And Grant, once he gets down there, Grant is inexperienced as well. He has absolutely no idea that the Confederates are actually planning a surprise attack on this position. He wired his superior in Washington, a guy by the name of Halleck, that I have scarcely the faintest idea of an attack. So Halleck told Grant, okay, sit tight at Pittsburgh Landing, aka Shiloh, and wait for Buell to get there. And once Buell gets there, you'll have an army of 75,000 men, and then you can move on to Corinth. So long story short, Grant sends his men to a position just north of Corinth. There they wait, and they're waiting for Buell to join them, and this concentration of forces, an army of 75,000 men, will then attack the transportation center of Corinth, Mississippi. That's the game plan. But Southerners, as the military says, the enemy gets a vote, and the Confederate Army was going to have something to say about this plan on the part of the Union forces.